Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. You're very welcome. My name's Keelan Ward. I'm the Pensions Policy Manager at IFOA, and you all have the misfortune of me chairing today. So the webinar today is on how do CDC pension schemes smooth members' pensions. That's the title, but we'll get into a bit of the sort of main topics in a little bit. We have 359 delegates have signed on as of just before this call, which is amazing. Thank you very much. This IFOA and Harriet Watt University funded research is an exciting program that we hope will play a key role in delivering better retirement outcomes for members in the wider public. The options currently available to access retirement savings are limited in some ways and require extreme choices sometimes to be made. Many employers and providers want to offer genuine alternatives, but there's some uncertainty as to new arrangements and how they will deliver on the objectives. This research itself is focused on longevity risk sharing in the retirement space. It will create and share, we hope, practicable worked examples of how to structure future products. Today's session itself will focus on smoothing pensions and how that might look and be achieved, but I'll leave the detail on that to our speaker. So welcome everyone who joined today. All questions will be sort of answered at the end of the session. Please use the Q&A function within the chat, and I'd just like to say that any questions we don't get to today, we will definitely come back to. So now that I've said a little bit about the program, I'd like to say a little bit about its lead and our presenter today, Professor Catherine Donnelly. Catherine's a professor in the Department of Actuarial Mathematics and Statistics at Harriet Watt, and also director of the Risk Insight Lab. She's a qualified actuary who previously worked in the pensions industry. Catherine has a PhD from the University of Waterloo in Canada and an MSc at Oxford and an MA from Cambridge. Very impressive. Her research interests lie in pensions and life insurance, and she's published widely in those areas. So yeah, as I say, you're all very welcome. And I think without further ado, I'll hand over to Catherine for the presentation.
Thank you very much, Keelan. So thanks for this opportunity to present our research work. So as Keelan said, this is part of a research program funded by the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries Actuarial Research Centre, so called, for the short version, Optimising Future Pension Plans. So there are two strands of research within this research program. The first one is about pooled annuity funds, and you can think of these as post-retirement accumulation only collective defined contribution pension plans effectively, where you're only sharing longevity risk among a group of retired people. So that's one strand of the research, and we've had some webinars on that, and there'll be more research coming up on that area. And the other strand of research is to do with what I'm going to present today on whole life collective defined contribution pension plans. And so, as we'll see shortly, there's been a lot of controversy about these plans, particularly focusing on the prototype, the Royal Mail Collective Pension Plan, which will shortly be launched. So the aim of what we were doing in this research is to try to understand what's going on beneath the bonnet of this type of whole life pension plan that looks very much like a defined benefit pension plan, but is not, and to understand that better. So that's what I'm going to present today is basically the high level results on one aspect of it, and it's to do really with intergenerational cross subsidies. So what I've identified are three types of intergenerational cross subsidies within this whole life defined benefit like CDC plan. And one of those cross subsidies, it's really a risk transfer, leads to this nice observed property of this whole life defined benefit like scheme, that pensions of the members are smoothed over time. In other words, basically, they're not very volatile. So we're going to understand where that's coming from. And then there's a couple of other risk sharing cross subsidies that we're going to talk about as well. But first, some background. Okay, so we have the primary legislation has gone through, we have invitations open for collective defined contribution plans to be approved by the regulators, and we're about to see the Royal Mail Collective Pension Plan, and it's really quite amazing that we're even at this point. So how did we get here? So what happened was, in the Royal Mail pension plan, which was a defined benefit pension plan, employer and employee contributions were calculated to be, some years ago, they were going to be over 50%, and the employer said we can't afford that. and they were going to close the defined benefit pension plan. The unionised members of the Royal Mail were not happy about that, and they went to strike about various things, including pensions. Now, eventually they sat down together and they decided to agree what do they want from a pension plan. And as a result of that agreement, they said, what we want, the type of pension plan we want, is a collective defined contribution pension plan, where we're sharing risk across all our members and across generations. And at the time, a CDC, a collective defined contribution plan, it did not exist in the UK. And instead of saying, well, it doesn't exist, we can't do that, they said, well, let's try and make it happen, right? So the reason why we have the opportunity to open CDC plans is because of the Royal Mail in this dispute. So we have something, I think, very, very positive coming from it. So the Royal Mail have come to this point, they've lobbied the government, and we're in this wonderful place that we can now have another type of pension scheme open up. But it's not without its controversy. So you may have seen some of the headlines about collective defined contribution plans, and they are typically focused on the Royal Mail one because that is the prototype scheme. So we've seen all these headlines, and maybe there's a kernel of truth in all of them. But what we're going to try and do in this, or what we are doing in this research program, is not to address directly the headlines. We're just trying to understand what's going on. And that's what I'm going to present in this presentation today, is my understanding of what's going on in a scheme that's like the Royal Mail scheme, but it is not the Royal Mail scheme. It has a lot more bells and whistles, that scheme, than what I'm looking at here. Now, if we look at a high level at a collective defined contribution pension plan, it looks really like any other type of pension plan. So we have contributions going in to grow the fund value. Those are invested, they earn investment returns, and then benefits are paid out over time. So this could be an individual contribution, defined contribution pension plan, it could be a defined benefit one. So how does it differ from, for example, defined benefit pension plan? Well, in the CDC plan, the contributions are fixed as a percentage of salary, but the benefit payments can change. So this is like our lever, we can change the benefit payments. We can adjust, we can and do adjust the benefit payments in a CDC plan, and we fix the contributions. Whereas in the defined benefit plan, the lever is the contributions. So the idea is that the benefit payments in a defined benefit plan are fixed, and you change the contributions to be able to pay the benefits. So we'll just look at a quick comparison of the different types of UK pension plans, typical ones we see. So we have a defined contribution one, a DC, a defined benefit one, that'll be the last row in this table you see, and the CDC collective defined contribution is in the middle. So in the, if we look first at the contribution levels, so the idea is that in the DC plan that they are fixed, in the CDC plan they're fixed, and the DB they vary. So in the DB plan, typically, not always, but typically the employees, the members of the DB pension plan, pay a fixed percentage of their salary, and the employer pays a balance of costs to meet the benefits. Then the benefit levels, they can vary in a DC and a CDC plan. So in the DC plan, you can also do a prediction of what you think the future benefits will be from the DC, the accumulation of the DC pension plan savings. In the CDC plan, the benefit levels are explicitly adjusted so that we have the assets, the total assets of the scheme equal to the total discounted benefits. And we'll see shortly how that's done, because that's important to explaining this intergenerational cross subsidies and risk sharing. In the defined benefit scheme, the benefit levels are fixed, so typically as a percentage of salary in the UK DB pension plan environment. Then there are two important questions. So who bears the risk and who decides the level of risk? So in a DC pension plan and a CD pension plan, the members bear the risk, because in these two plans, the contribution levels are fixed, and it's the benefits that are adjusted in line with the experience of the scheme. In the defined benefit pension plan, it's typically only the employers bearing the risk. So you could say the extreme case, the scheme can't pay the benefits, and it's then the members. So the members do bear some risk, but principally it's employers bearing the risk in a defined benefit pension plan. And then who decides the level of risk? So in a DC pension plan, it seems that nominally we've got the members deciding the risk, because you typically say to a DC pension plan member, oh, pick one of these funds. You can invest in any of these 10 funds, whichever one you like. But as we know from the actual choices people make, they typically, like 90 to 95% of them will choose whatever's labelled as a default fund, because they really don't know what else to do perhaps, or maybe they do think that's a good fund. So whoever's choosing the composition of that default investment fund to put your DC contributions into is really deciding the level of risk in the DC plan. So jumping down to the bottom, the DB plan, it's really the employers and the trustees deciding the level of risk. And in the CDC plan, I guess it's not entirely clear right now, but it should be the trustees, but I would think perhaps also the members will have a say in that. For example, if contribution levels were to be changed for some reason, I presume there'll be some sort of consultation with the members about that. Okay, so that's just a high level comparison of these sort of main types of schemes. Now, what I'm going to present to you, the results I'm presenting about cross subsidies, are to do with a specific type of scheme. It's one that looks very much like a defined benefit scheme, but it has a collective risk sharing aspect to it. So it's a whole life scheme. So assume that members contribute every year for 40 years into the scheme, and then they retire at age 65. And for each contribution they make, they accrue 1/80th of their salary as an annual pension amount paid from age 65, and that's a single life pension. And we just assume that the members pay a constant contribution rate as a percentage of salary. And so the sort of high level question that came out of the results and the study of this were about the cross subsidies. And we're going to see that there were three types of cross subsidies identified. Now, before I get into these cross subsidies, I just want to emphasize again that this is not the only type of collective defined contribution scheme, right? There are many possible different types. This is a scheme that's similar. The one I've present here is similar to the Royal Mail scheme, but it doesn't have, for example, things with the funding gates. I'm obviously doing a very simplified scheme, only valuing single life pensions. There's no death and service benefits. I actually assume everybody survives during the pre-retirement period, and then in retirement they can die. But before that, I just assume they survive, so I don't worry about death and service benefits and things like that. Just focus on the main benefit. But you can do different schemes. So as I said right at the very beginning, for example, you could have a decumulation post-retirement only collective defined contribution scheme where you're only sharing longevity risk among a pool of people, a group of people, and that would be what I would call a pooled annuity fund. You can call it, there are many different names to call it, but that's another stream of research. You could do that scheme, but you could also include, for example, investment risk sharing. You could do this pension smoothing. That would be another thing you could possibly do. I don't know if anybody studied that yet. You could do a scheme like the one I'm studying here, this DB-like one, but instead of having a constant rate of benefit accrual of 1/80th, you could have an age-related benefit accrual, so that the younger you are in the scheme, the more you accrue in terms of a benefit because you're further from retirement. And you can do all sorts of variations about that. And these schemes will have different cross subsidies in them according to their benefit design. But we're focusing on the Royal Mail one because it is the first one, and it's the reason why we have CDC schemes. It's also going to be very, very large. It'll be not far off 150,000 members. And it is just very influential. All these headlines we've seen about CDC schemes are about studies of the Royal Mail one. So I think it's well justified to look at one that's like it, but as I say, it's not the same as it. Okay, so what are these intergenerational cross subsidies? So I'll just give you sort of high level introduction to them first, and then we'll look at each of them in turn. So the first one is how we get this pension smoothing arising in this scheme. And it's actually, I think personally very, very clever. And it's all to do with the collective risk sharing mechanism in this scheme. Now, what happens in this first intergenerational cross subsidy, it's really a risk transfer. And at each point in time in the scheme, when we calculate what we'll see the annual pension increase, what will happen is there will be a risk transfer from the older members in the scheme to the younger members. So the older members will have a reduction in their risk, and the younger members will have an increase in the risk. And this is a source of the pension smoothing in the scheme. The second cross subsidy is it's only a one-way cross subsidy, and it's to do with the fact of having a constant rate of benefit accrual. And that leads to an inconsistency from a financial point of view, an inconsistency with the collective risk sharing mechanism. So the constant rate of benefit accrual is fine if you're looking at things on a lifetime basis, but it gives us an inconsistency in the collective risk sharing, which is basically done on an accrued basis. And in this cross subsidy, we'll see that the first generations get a higher pension than what we think they should, that we might think they should. And the cost of this higher pension is paid for by later generations. Now, you might be happy with a constant rate of benefit accrual because it's easier to communicate to members who may understand what they're getting better. But you can also remove this cross subsidy, if you like, by using an age-related benefit accrual. So it's a consequence of a design choice, which you may want to do for other reasons, nothing to do with the financial aspect. And then the third cross subsidy is one you see in any risk sharing scheme, where you have generations joining past the start of the scheme. So in this cross subsidy, you'll see it in with profits contracts, for example. It's just due to the difference in what you think will happen in terms of future economic scenarios and the future mortality experience of the members, the difference between what you think will happen and what actually happens. And this subsidy, so before the scheme starts and we have nobody's joined it, let's say, this should have a cost of zero to all members, including from the current ones to the future joiners. But once the scheme starts, you should be able to calculate the amount of this subsidy, the cumulative amount of subsidy at each point in time. But this is really something I think you can't avoid in any sort of risk sharing scheme. Okay, so now we're going to look at each of these cross subsidies in turn. So we'll look at the risk transfer one. So I'll spend the most time on this because it's perhaps more complicated in some way, but it's really interesting feature. Just before I do that, in order to explain that, I'm going to explain what is the collective risk sharing mechanism in this scheme? How does it work? Because that's very important to understanding this risk transfer. Okay, so in this CDC plan, the risk sharing is done through annual pension increases. And the idea is that every year, each member gets the same annual pension increase, right? So everybody who's in the scheme today who had a pension accrued from last year, they'll be told, for example, today, oh, now we've done our calculation of your new pension increase, and everybody's told you're going to get, for example, 3%. They'll get the same annual increase. The next year, they're told, for example, oh, your pension increase is 2%, something like that. But everybody who's in the scheme at the same time will get the same pension increase, which seems very innocuous, but then you get this risk transfer going on. So how do we calculate this? So just to put it into your mind, how do we do this? So as I said, we want to calculate each year this annual pension increase to be given on every member's pension. And we do this, as I said, by equating our total asset value, the entire asset value of the scheme, with the total value of the discounted benefits. And what we do is we project the benefits accrued, say last year in our simple setting, last year we project them up to retirement and then discount them back today. And when we project them up to retirement, we project them at an unknown annual pension increase, H, we'll call it H. And then we equate that, it'll be a function of H, our unknown annual increase. We equate that total discounted value of benefits, which is a function of H, to our assets, and then solve for H. Right, so that's a little bit of work to do that if you want to do that in your valuation software, because it's probably not set up to solve such equations, but that's what you have to do. So for example, if we took one of our members in the scheme, let's assume they're age 31 today, we were doing this valuation to determine the annual pension increase. Last year, they'd accrued £500 per annum as a pension that would be paid in retirement. Now, pardon me, that pension, that £500 does not include future annual increases. So you want to determine this unknown pension increase H. You project £500 up from age 30, which was last year, up to their age 65, their assumed retirement age, then age 66. You allow for the probability of them surviving up to those ages. So the typical calculation, and then you discount back to today using your whatever your discount rates are. And you do that for every member of the scheme and sum up the total discounted value today over all the members in the scheme. And that will be a function of H. And then you set that equal to your total asset value, solve for H. So you've got an implicit equation to solve in H. But let's say you do that, right? So you do that and you find out that your H, and I'll call it H star because the solution is 3%. So you say to everybody, you're now all getting 3% more accrued pension today. So your person who had £500 per annum last year, they now have 3% more. So they're told, you now have a pension of £515 per annum accrued today. Right, great. So then let's get to now this pension smoothing aspect that we're going to explain now. So this is a transfer of risk from the older members to the younger members. So we'll do this through an example, an imaginary example. And just before I get on to that, just to explain what I mean by the pension smoothing. So I'm just showing you here some simulations we did. Basically, we've got some bumpy lines because of the some simulation error. But let's look at the left-hand chart first. So we have time since joining from 0 to 40. So this is our contribution period. For each member spends 40 years contributing in this scheme we're looking at. So we're assuming that time 0, a 25-year-old joins. The next year, time 1, another 25-year-old joins. And we've got the previous 25-year-old who's now 26. And we just have every year one person joins. So we can look at the accrued benefit as a percentage of salary of each of these members. So on the left-hand chart, I have that for the CDC scheme, so the time since joining of each generation. And on the y-axis, I have this accrued benefit as a percentage of salary at the time since joining. So that accrued benefit as a percentage of salary is just the replacement ratio. And if I look here at the lines in black, so I have a solid black line, that's the median replacement ratio at each time since joining the scheme of generation 1, the first generation to join. And then the black dotted lines around it are the 25th and 75th percentiles around that. And you've got this cone around this median. It's hard to say, is that a narrow one or not? But if you look at the comparison with the DC plan, where you are following more of a lifestyling strategy, we've got a similar chart. You've got the time since joining on the y-axis, and then the replacement ratio, the ratio of the accrued benefit each time divided by the salary. Now these lines are a bit bumpier because actually it's to do with the smoothness, that they're less smooth than the other ones. This is a simulation error. So the central line here is the median, and the dotted lines above and below it, they are the 25th and 75th percentiles again. And you basically see it's a much wider percentile. That's what I'm getting at in the DC plan compared to the CDC plan. The CDC plan collective one is doing the pension smoothing. Now you notice on the left-hand chart, the CDC plan, the later generations are getting less, and we'll explain that shortly. That's about this second cross subsidy. That's the first generation is getting a higher pension than the later one. Okay, so that's just to illustrate the pension smoothing. So it's basically a reduction in the volatility of the pension. Okay, so this is our thought experiment now. So let's say you had done your annual pension increase calculation and you calculated it's 3%. Suddenly the asset value falls by 10%, and you were just about to tell the members that the annual pension increase was 3%, but you think, well, the asset value has fallen by 10%, let's recalculate the pension increase. And all your assumptions are otherwise unchanged, except the asset value has gone down by 10%. So you recalculate your pension increase that you apply across all members, and you find it to be 2.4%. Right, it's lower because the asset value has fallen. It's still a positive one, but it's lower because of the asset value. So you tell everybody the annual amount you're going to get in retirement has now increased by 2.4%. right? So they wouldn't know it would have been 3% of the asset value hasn't fallen. They've just been told it's 2.4%. But we can know that, and we can look and see how does the value of each member's accrued pension change, right? So let's look at the value across the membership. So we assume, well, I guess we're looking at the pre-retirement membership. So here we have a table on this slide. So we have the number of years to retirement. So let's look at someone who's say age 64, they've got 1 year to retirement. Now the asset value has fallen by 10%, but in the CDC plan, the discounted value of this member who's 64 falls by much less than 10%. It only falls by just over 5%. Oops, I have accidentally gone forward. It falls by just over 5%. The person who's, the next column, the person who's 2 years from retirement, they're age 63, their asset value falls by, their asset value, the discounted value of benefits falls by 5.7%, a little bit more. And we see that as we go down this table, for example, the person who's far from retirement, 39 years from retirement, this would be a 26-year-old, the discounted value of their benefit changes by almost 25%, drops by almost 25%. Now, this is when we have a constant pension increase applied to all members. This is what happens to the discounted value of each member's accrued pension. So the people who are far from retirement, the discounted value of their benefit changes by far more. Now, if we had instead put all these members' pension into, not their pension, their contributions into a defined contribution plan, and the asset value had fallen by 10%, then we'd have to apply that 10% drop to change the DC pension plan value of each member. They would have individually experienced a 10% drop in value. So this is basically the risk transfer. And we can also think, let's imagine we had a CDC plan where we didn't do annual pension increases. We just said, well, if the asset value has fallen, I'm going to just decrease everybody's discounted value of benefits by 10% as well. You could do that instead of doing annual pension increases. And then you could calculate for each, for the 64-year-old, the 63-year-old, you could individually calculate for them an annual pension increase. But what would happen is if you did that, if you applied a 10% decrease to the discounted value of benefits for each member, then the person who's 64, you would be spreading a 10% fall in their discounted value of benefits over a shorter period compared to the person who's 26. And so you would actually need to drop their pension increase by more than 2.4% in order to take account of that fall in assets of 10%. Or not assets, discounted value, keep saying assets, discounted value of benefits. Whereas a person who's 26, if you said, oh, I'm going to not do this annual pension increase, I'm just going to change the value of discounted benefits by 10%, then they have a much longer time period to take account of that fall in their discounted value of benefits of 10%, and their pension increase annual pension increase would be higher than 2.4%. Right, so by fixing this annual pension increase to be the same across all the memberships, this is causing this risk transfer. You're actually transferring the risk from the old people to the young people. And we can see this in either of those two ways, but just by looking at the value change of each member's accrued pension, or by thinking what would happen if I didn't do the constant annual increase, I just give everybody an individual annual pension increase instead. How would I take account of that 10% fall? We can see the volatility in these members, different generations accrued pension value if you look and see what happened if the asset value went up by 10% instead of down by 10%. Then if we do that, we would have recalculated the annual pension increase to be 3.5% instead of 3%. And then we can look at the discounted value of each member's benefit. And we can see here, for example, the person who's 1 year from retirement, who's age 64, then the discounted value of their benefits would have gone up by only 4.8% instead of 10%, right? So basically their discounted value of benefits is changing by about 5% instead of this 10% plus or minus values. Whereas the person who's 26 and 39 years from retirement, the discounted value of their benefits is changing by 28%. So you can see they're experiencing a much larger volatility in their discounted value of benefits compared to the volatility in the asset value. Okay, but this is very interesting because we're transferring risk from the old people to the young people. It's also going to allow the scheme to take more investment risk for longer for the older people, from the viewpoint of you're protecting the older people from the volatility of that higher risk investment strategy. So perhaps that's a reason for why the CDC plan can take more investment risk for longer, because you're protecting the older people from the volatility of that investment strategy. Now, in terms of downsides, you can think of the downsides if you were one of these younger people, and so we go back here to the previous slide. If you're one of the younger people, so we're looking at the negatives here, because I guess that's what we do in the actuarial industry. We look at the negatives a lot. If the asset value had fallen by 10% and we had a few years of poor returns, then your discounted value benefits would have fallen, and the next year it would fall again, and the next year fallen again. But you're moving up this ladder, and your discounted value benefits is becoming less sensitive to changes. Still very sensitive, but less sensitive. So maybe you have enough runs of poor returns such that you're too far up the age ladder to make good the deficit in a sense of your of these per asset returns. And the other thing would be if you were a younger member and you transferred out your benefits, that you'd be transferring out a smaller share of the benefits because of this risk transfer. If you're transferring out after a run of per returns. Okay, so this slide here is really just emphasizing that. So this is the summary for this first intergenerational cross subsidy, this risk transfer from the old people to the young people. It's entirely due to the choice of using this annual pension increase. Now, in a previous paper done by myself and Dr. Andres Baracas-Paz on this project, we looked at a CDC scheme where we didn't do annual pension increases. We simply applied the same change in the discounted value benefits to all the members. We didn't discover any pension smoothing in that whatsoever, and it really is due to this use of the annual pension increases that is bringing you about this pension smoothing and this risk transfer. So I think this is just the summary of that. So this is the first one, the first cross subsidy, and I'm now going to move on to the next cross subsidy, which is about the constant rate of benefit accrual. So this is a subsidy that only goes one way, and it's the first generations in this scheme, if you have a scheme starting up, that they get a higher benefit than they should compared to the later generations. Okay, but to understand this, so we're understanding the cost of using a constant rate of benefit accrual. So we're going to do another little thought experiment here, and we're going to look at think about two imaginary schemes, which are what I'll say is financially fair on an accrued basis. Now, financial fairness underpins a lot of what we do in actuarial work. It's basically that the expected present value of what you're paying for something equals the expected present value of the benefits. Now, we can do that calculation on a lifetime basis, which we may do in a defined benefit pension scheme. Or we can be more granular, and we can do that calculation on an accrued basis, which is basically saying that each contribution you make, when you make a contribution, the amount of benefit you accrue by that contribution, the value of that benefit should equal the value of the contribution, right? And we don't have that accrued financial fairness whenever we have a constant rate of benefit accrual with a constant contribution rate. So let's look first two schemes where we do have this accrued financial fairness. So let's imagine a scheme first where we have constant contributions and an age-related benefit accrual, and we choose the amount of benefit that you accrue, so that each contribution, you can invest each contribution separately outside of the scheme, and if everything turned out as expected, you would get the value of that, the amount of that benefit at retirement. And this little example, we just assume everything is constant, so we don't have salaries. It's just amounts of the money that we're paying and amounts of money we're accruing, but it's the same principle underpinning it. And we'll assume that you're trying to get, say, £100 per annum at retirement. So on a certain basis, and the actual basis is unimportant, we're just looking at relative numbers here, the idea. Let's just assume you join this scheme at age 35, let's say it's an executive scheme or something like that, and you can retire at age 65, so you've got 30 potential years in the scheme. And let's say age 35, you make your first contribution of £36 for every £100 per annum you want to accumulate of your target benefit. So you pay £36 and you're told, well, that will accumulate you 4.7% of your £100 target benefit. For someone who's age 40, so let's say 5 years later, you're age 40, you make your sixth contribution. Again, it's the same amount, £36, and you're told you accumulate less, 4.1%. Right, so the idea is that you could take your £36, invest it, and if everything turned out as expected on the basis you used to calculate that contribution, then you would get 4.1% of £100, so £4 and 10 pence paid in your retirement. Now we see that the amount you accrue, well, the percentage of your benefit you accrue as you get older decreases, right? So this is your compound accrual, right, or age-related accrual. It's like a decreasing compound accrual. But we can also calculate the total amount that you accrue each age. So, for example, at age 40, you've made 6 contributions just after you turn 40, and you've accrued just over a quarter of your total benefit over 5 years out of your total 30 years of contributions. By age 45, so 10 years in, you've accrued not far off half of your total benefit, 45.5% of your total benefit, right? And this is the age-related benefit accrual, and it's financially fair and that life on a accrued basis, each contribution could be invested and give you the benefit you accrue with that contribution in retirement. So let's consider another scheme where you have a constant rate of benefit accrual and age-related contributions. And again, pardon me, the relationship between the amount you accrue with each contribution is so that the value of each contribution equals the value of that benefit. Again, financially fair. So now we've got a similar table, but we're looking at the same table, we're looking at the bottom half of it. So here again, let's look at a 35-year-old. They pay in this case £25, and they're accruing. We've got a constant rate of accrual, constant rate of benefit accrual. So they are accruing 1/30th, 3.3% of their target benefit. And at every age, you're going to accrue 1/30th of your target benefit. But you can see the contributions are going up over time, right? Because as you get older, you get closer to retirement and less time for those contributions to earn investment returns in order to accrue the same rate of benefit. And again, we can look at the cumulative accrued percentage. Okay, fine. That's all great. But now what do we do whenever we fix the contributions and we fix the benefit accrual rate? Right, so then what we have is this red box, right? So if you decide I want to fix contributions and fixed accrual, then if we were to do that within this setting, you would pay £36 at every age, no matter what age you are, and at each age you would also accrue 1/30th of your benefit. Okay, how does that relate to CDC plans? Right, so let's imagine we have a CDC plan and we've got this constant contributions and constant accrual percentage. So someone age 35 joins the scheme, and then 1 year later you say, well, I need to calculate your annual pension increase. So they're 36, you look at the accumulated value of their contributions, so they paid £36, you see what that's worth today. So something around £36 it should be worth today. So when they're 36, 1 year later. And you say, well, I want to calculate my pension increase so that the asset value, the accumulated value of this contribution of £36 equals the discounted value of the benefits. Right, so the benefits, well, you were told you accrued 1/30th of your target pension, so 3.3%. So I need to project that to retirement, discount back today, set that equal to my accumulated contributions and solve my pension increase. Now, the issue here is that the benefit that is equivalent to your £36 was actually 4.7%, much higher than what you've told the person, 3.3%. And that equating the asset value with the liability value, let's say the discounted value of benefits, means that that pension increase is going to try to increase that 3.3% of your £100 up to something that's closer to 4.7% of £100. So you're going to get a large pension increase for the first generation in the scheme because of this, right? Because the discounted value of their benefits are too low for the contribution they've made, right? So the benefits are too low for the contribution made. So the annual pension increase calculation will try to increase the value of the benefits to the value of the contribution, right, in order to make them equal. And we'll see this, this effect will last for a few years in this type of scheme, right? And it'll stop having less of effect whenever you've got a existing asset value that's fairly large, and the impact of a new person coming in who's young, adding in their contribution will be much diminished in terms of calculating the pension increase. It won't have much impact on the overall pension increase value. But we'll see for the first generations coming in, it is there. So I think actually the next slide I'll just skip. So this is just saying the CDC scheme, you may have, well, it's calculated here, the value of the future lifetime contributions equals the value of the total benefit accrued over the lifetime. So we have lifetime financial fairness, but we don't have accrued financial fairness. And this matters in this CDC scheme where you're doing this annual pension increase calculation. Now here we have some simulations, so I'll just take each graph in turn to illustrate this. So let's focus on the left-hand graph here. This is annual increases, pension increases. Now what I've done here is I've taken a very simple economic basis. So we assumed that investment returns were 5%, wages were going up by 3%, and inflation was 2%. And I calculated the contribution, assuming that future pension increases were going to be equal to inflation of 2%. And I ran the scheme through a model, and I assumed there were 150 generations in the scheme, and they're each in the scheme. Each generation was in the scheme for 40 years making contributions, and then they would retire. So they stayed in the scheme until they died. It assumed a membership where time zero, the start of the scheme, a 25-year-old joined, the next year another 25-year-old joined. Well, actually, it wasn't just one, it was thousands of them joined, because I wanted to eliminate the effect of a poor pooling of longevity risk until the very end. But basically, thousands of people joined at age 25, then another 1 year later, thousands join again at age 25, and you'll end up with this profile of members in the scheme. So the left-hand chart, we have the time from 0 to 250, it goes up to here. And on the y-axis, we have the annual pension increases awarded. Now there's a horizontal line at 2%, that's what you would think that the pension increases would be. And I assumed that everything turned out as expected. So we thought returns were going to be 5%, they were 5%. And we thought wages were going to be 3%, they were 3%. Now, this black line that's slightly curvy, this is the actual pension increase from our calculation of the annual pension increases. So at time one, there's a jump up from what we thought it was going to be 2% to what it actually turned out to be 3%. And this is due to this, that we don't do the fact we don't have financial fairness on an accrued basis. And so the annual pension increases are above 2% for a while, and then they fall below the 2%, and there's this decline. So these these vertical lines are corresponding to sort of certain things happening in the scheme. So the horizontal line, vertical line here, the first one is at time 40, and this is corresponding to the first generation retiring in the scheme. So that's when we start paying out benefits for the first time. Then we've got one at time 150. This is the last generation joining the scheme, and then another vertical line where in that last generation pays their last contribution, and then they retire, and there's no more new money coming into the scheme. And from that time on, we have effectively like a pooled annuity fund, really, no new money, and we're just paying out pensions to people. And then the pension increases get very, very volatile at the end. This is because there's not enough people to pool longevity risk with. And we wouldn't let the scheme get to that point. I'm just showing you it for completeness here. Okay, but basically we don't see the pension increases along the 2% line for most of the time because of this too high pension paid out to the earlier generations, which is then paid for by the later generations. Now, just highlighting this, so on the right-hand chart, we show the replacement ratio at retirement. So this is the amount of pension at retirement, the annual amount of pension at retirement divided by the salary in the year before retirement. And we show that replacement ratio for each generation in the scheme. So that's the x-axis, the generation number in the scheme, and the y-axis is the replacement ratio. I've just drawn solid lines here instead of dots because visually it's easier to see. So the black line corresponds to the CDC plan. So we see again the first generations get this higher pension, with the very first generation getting the highest one. And this is again everything turning out as expected. There's a horizontal blue line that's supposed to be a life annuity. So you do DC plus life annuity and then DC plus pooled annuity fund. They're actually exactly the same under the assumptions I make here. And that's what you'd get if you'd put your contributions instead into a DC plan with the intention of then buying a life annuity or putting your money into pooled annuity funds. So the income you get would be through dividing your fund value by a life annuity expected present value. And the red line is what you get from income drawdown, where we assume that you're going to pay out, you want to pay out your fund value over 25 years from age 65 to age 90. So that would be dividing the fund value by a fixed term annuity, which gives you a lower expected income than compared to when you're dividing by a life annuity. That's basically the longevity risk sharing gain you get, the difference between the blue line and the red line. But the black line is coming about, this shape of the black line is coming out because of this constant rate of a benefit accrual. And you might think, well, okay, that's a scheme where you have one person join at age 25 at time zero, then another person joining later. What if we had a more mature membership profile to start with? So let's assume that we have a generation joining, at time zero, we have a number of generations join the scheme. So we have the one age 64, one age 63, one age 62, all joining at the same time, time zero. Then the next year, we then allow the 25-year-old to join, the following year, another 25-year-old to join, and so on. Well, we have the same type of charts here. So on the left-hand side, the annual pension increases. You see, again, you see this slightly larger annual pension increase, in this case with a more mature membership profile starting off, but we see that the annual pension increases more quickly go to this sort of stable, just below 2% value. Again, when everything turns out as expected on an economic basis. So basically this pension increase below 2% we see from about generation, I'm going to guess about 10 or so onwards, that this is again just the cost of paying this higher pension increase to the earlier generations, the first generations. And then otherwise it's the same. And we see the replacement ratio at retirement is again similar. We just have a lower replacement ratio for the first generations because they weren't in the scheme for very long. So your 64-year-old only had 1 year's accrual of benefit, your 63-year-old only had a 2-year accrual of benefit, and so on. But we see the same sort of picture as before. You get higher pension paid to the CDC plan members who are first in the scheme compared to putting your money into DC plan options. And then then the CDC plan options fall below the longevity risk sharing ones, the annuity and pooled annuity fund at higher generations because of paying that earlier little anomaly. Okay, so yeah, again, so you could eliminate this effect if you wanted to, but again, there's other issues other than just pure financial ones in terms of how you design a scheme by doing an age-related benefit accrual, because this would be more financially fair, though it wouldn't be entirely unless you were all the time, every year, updating the amount of benefit you would accrue by each benefit in line with what you thought was going to happen. But it would be more fair. You'd diminish that effect in a more realistic scenario, more real life. Okay, so I'm going to be more speedy about this part. So this is the last cross-subsidy I'm going to look at. So we've just seen the two ones, this risk transfer from older to younger due to the annual pension increases, which leads to pension smoothing and the ability to take more investment risk for longer if you're concerned with reducing the volatility of the older members' income. And then we have the first generations benefiting at the expense of the later generations due to a constant rate of benefit accrual. And then we have the third one, which, as I said before, is something that you really can't escape from in these risk sharing schemes. And this is just happening across time, and it's due to your predicted returns being different to the actual returns and your predicted mortality experience being different to the actual one. Okay, so basically the idea is very simple. If you pay out too much today, then the later generations get less. So if you think investment returns are going to be higher than what they actually turn out to be, then you end up paying out too much too less, because all our payments out in the scheme, you're going to have to make predictions of what's going to happen to calculate income payments out, because it all involves expected present value of future payments. And again, we're showing these results. They're let's say laboratory kind of results, but they could be exacerbated depending on changes in the membership profile. So if you pay out too much now and you've got a large membership today, you pay a lot of money to a lot of people, and then later your membership profile shrinks, then a smaller membership profile later on will be bearing the cost of paying out a larger amount of money to earlier generations and so on. Or it could work the other way and diminish the effect of it. But we don't look at that here. So I'll just look at one of these charts, because otherwise we won't have much time for questions. So this is just the laboratory experiment. So let's say you thought investment returns were going to be 5%. So we have here two charts. On the left-hand side, we have a chart we saw earlier where the actual return is indeed 5. And this is showing you the replacement ratio at retirement of each generation. So we saw this chart earlier. On the right-hand chart, let's assume that the actual return turned out to be lower than what you thought. So it's 4% rather than 5%. Then you end up paying out, relatively speaking, too much to the earlier generations. And then the later generations get less because of that. And you see, for example, at the very end, the later generations do worse than income drawdown based income calculation. And then have a similar chart where your actual return is 6%. So the left-hand chart is the same as before, and the actual return is higher than you thought. So you thought it's going to be 5%, turns out to be 6%. You end up paying out not enough to the first generations, and then the later generations benefit. Now, these examples are extreme because you're assuming that every year you always for example, in this case, you always have a 1% per annum difference to what the actual return is. They are extreme, and in practice it's likely it's going to be plus or minus, though there could obviously be biases in your predictions against expectations, but it's just to illustrate this effect. But this is the sort of common cross subsidy that occurs in any risk sharing scheme. Okay, so in summary, we have identified 3 types of cross subsidies. One of these, as we've just seen, is common to all risk sharing schemes, and 2 of them are entirely due to benefit design. So one of them is due to this choice of using annual pension increases to give all the members a constant, the same rate of pension increase in all their pensions. And this has the really nice effect that you're transferring risk from the older to the younger members. You're smoothing or reducing the income volatility experienced by older members. And it means that you could take more investment risk to reduce the income volatility for older members. But I haven't shown you this here. That's another webinar. You don't remove the risk from the scheme by continuing to take investment risk. What you see is you can look at the standard deviation of the income paid out to each generations, and you'll see that actually increases over time. If you maintain a high risk, say 100% equity strategy, you'll see the standard deviation of the income increases with each generation. And then the other type of cross subsidy was to do with this constant rate of benefit accrual. So I think Keelan said put a screen on, so that's a sign for me that I should finish very, very quickly. So we have more technical results, let's say, about simulations, but that will be another webinar. We can explore that. But yes, and if bibliography, we've got some papers coming out of it, which have been submitted to academic journals. And I will stop there and pass over to Keelan. And I have to stop sharing as well.
Not a problem, Catherine. With about 5 minutes, we can do a couple of questions. Thank you very much. I'll just take one from the start. So someone has said risk and reward are closely linked. They agree that younger people are more exposed to asset losses, but ask, aren't they also more exposed to asset gains? So they say that risk transfer is there, but isn't there an argument as well that younger people should be taking more risk in pensions than older people, hence the default strategies in DC?
Exactly. So this is the whole the economic basis of why you should take more investment risk. The explanation for why you should take more investment risk when you're young is that you've got more time to bear the investment risk. Now, of course, you can again look at the downside and look, well, you could experience lots of negative returns and you end up in a much worse position. Yeah. But I guess you can look at DC pension plan default fund options, and it's basically saying take 80% usually in equities. It is a high risk strategy. And this is why I also think this is really, really interesting, this risk transfer, because you're not saying the people who should take risk will bear it, but this is a consequence of doing this, is that you think older people can't afford to take risks because they need more certainty about their income. So you're transferring it to the younger people in the scheme who can bear more risk. Now, you don't have to run a 100% equity strategy. You could maybe do a 60% equity strategy. And then you could look at, well, what is the equivalent equity investment by the younger people if you do that in this scheme compared to the older people? Because effectively the younger people would be taking more than the sort of 60% equity investment compared to the older people. So I think that's also, I think it's a very interesting. It's exactly the young people, from the economic basis is that they should be taking more risk to get the higher expected return over time. Mm-hmm. But in expectation, it's not the distribution. Yep.
Yeah. We've another one here from Gary who says, did you also consider the effect of longevity improvements?
Yeah, no, we haven't done that. So again, if you consider longevity improvements, well, it depends, do you take account of them or not? So if you didn't take account of them in your calculation of your annuities and longevity improved more than you thought you would, in other words, you're paying out pensions for longer, then the cost of that would be borne by the later generations again in this scheme. So you'd have a higher cost to the later generations if you hadn't taken account of it in your assumptions about the future. But no, we haven't done that. It basically, if you want to include a I would do a systematic mortality risk using a stochastic model, and then the calculation of that pension increase would become horrendous. It would be like a whole exercise to do that calculation using a stochastic model, because we've done it in the pooled annuity funds, but then it would be very complicated to do it in this scheme.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Maybe we have time for one more before we wrap up. Someone has asked, how does smoothing of retirement incomes work during the retirement phase?
Exactly. So it is actually the same. So you'll just see that basically if you think, it's not in terms of expected lifetime, but let's just say you have some time of death. And as you get older, you get closer to that time of death. And in this pension smoothing, what it's doing is it's reducing the volatility as you get closer to that time of death, in a sense. But it's obviously a sort of distribution. But basically, it'll work the same in retirement. So you just get closer and closer to that time of death. And the volatility of your discounted value will get less and less and less over time. So you could do this annual pension increases in a pooled annuity fund that's decumulation only, and try the same kind of thing as well. That would also be interesting to study.
I'm going to take one quick one. This is an interesting one. It's just come in from Craig. He says, in the first type of cross subsidy, the value of members' benefits have different but well-defined sensitivities to changes in fund value, and those vary by age. It sounds equivalent to a form of lifestyling strategy where the amount of risk exposure to the fund is varied with age. And if that makes sense, it could be interesting to consider what the equivalent implied lifestyling strategy is for a given rule. So he said it looks like young members effectively have a highly geared exposure to the fund return, which may or may not seem like an intuitive amount of risk.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great comment, and avenue to look at to see if we could do that.
Cool. We just have a couple of minutes. So first of all, thank you very much, Catherine, for a very informative presentation, and thank you to all of you who have logged on today. A couple of notes from me: you can continue to follow the progress of the research on the IFOA website, and please do get in touch with any further questions that we'll try and get to after the webinar. You'll see on the screen now there's a QR code. If you would please complete the feedback survey on today's webinar, that would be great. But yeah, thanks everyone for joining, and hopefully we can continue the conversation across the next little while. Thank you, and thank you, Catherine, again.
Thanks very much, Keelan. Thanks everybody for attending.
Thanks everyone.